Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I want to talk to you about the election map. More specifically, the Electoral College election map. Assuming it's still with us by 2030, it's going to change a bunch. And I want to discuss where we're headed, because the map by the end of this decade isn't going to look the same as the one by the beginning. Now, what I've done is I've taken the map and put in the safe seats that you can assume of the decade of the 2010s. So roughly 2010 to 2020, a little bit of 2008 in there just to balance things out, but overall this is roughly the safe map you get. Democrats with domination over the West Coast and much of the Northeast, except for some more reddening areas, as well as a good chunk of the Great Lakes area, Minnesota, Illinois, and Michigan, and gaining control of the Southwest with Hawaii in their corner. While Republicans hold much of the Deep South, a similar grip over the Deep South to what the Democrats have in the Northeast, as well as the Heartland and Great Plains areas, alongside Alaska and Utah to round things out, giving Democrats in the 2024 electoral projections. So after the realignment and census has occurred, will give the Democrats 244 electoral votes, while Republicans will have 165. Not enough for anyone to particularly win, but, one side clearly has the advantage here. The Democrats only need, in practice, to win really 2 states, and they win the election. Well, or in certain cases, 1, if they win Florida, they win the election. Well, the GOP needs to win a lot of states here. Now, things are changing. And, we're going to adjust that map. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take the current trends, the trends that as they've been going since about 2008, but like I said, 2010 is when the real realignment began. We're in the final stages of this realignment that in many ways began back with Reagan into the 90s, into the 2000s, and now we're in its final form, where it switches from kind of a wage divide to a more racial and location divide, the urban-rural divide, and the, in many ways, white-non-white divide. And there's a strong young and old divide in there too. So what we're going to do is, starting off, let's just remove the states which are going to become more contentious over the next decade. They are Texas, Utah, Kentucky. We'll discuss each of these individually in a moment. And I believe Indiana. All of these states are going to become a lot more competitive for one main reason. Big population centers which are with a lot of suburbs. Now, essentially what's happened is for about the past 4 years, we're witnessing a trend where suburbanite voters have gone from being more focused on fiscal conservatism to social liberalism. In the best way to describe your average suburbanite voter, and keep in mind the suburbs are becoming more diverse too, so this is a factor here, is they would describe themselves as fiscally conservative and socially liberal, meaning I want low taxes, but I want the gays to be allowed in the same cake shop I go to, that type of thing. Now, what's happened is, as the country itself legally and culturally has moved on and kind of accepted homosexuality, transgenderism, immigration as cultural mainstays and cultural goods, the GOP has not. They still have an anti-gay marriage plank in their platform, to give you an idea. As such, especially with Trump at the helm, we've seen suburbanite voters decide it's more important to be socially liberal than fiscally conservative, a switch from where they used to be. And all of these areas are pretty suburban. So Indiana, we're looking at Indianapolis, Lafayette, those areas. Kentucky, the Louisville area. Texas, just Houston, as well as the other major areas. Texas is the least surprising. And Utah with Salt Lake City. Maybe Missouri might end up in there, and we'll watch these areas become softer colors of red, but overall, these are the areas that are about to be contentious. But there are also going to be some changes from the previous existing ones. Oh, sorry, I forgot one other. Alaska. But Alaska's going to be an interesting case, and we'll get to them at the very end here. So while all of those areas are getting more neutral, purplish, let's look at where some of these other states are going, starting with Arizona, which is obviously turning more blue. Arizona is going to be a blue state by 2030, by far. We're not going to see it drop off the map. We're not going to see it turn anything different. And this has been a long change coming. It started off with the south of Arizona wanting to secede because of how blue they were. And it slowly spread up to the Maricopa County area until the entire state is more bluish. The destiny of the Southwest is to become a Democratic stronghold if the two parties remain where they're at. That's a very good pickup for the Democrats because Arizona is a state that gained electors. Now, let's give the Republicans some good news briefly and add two states into their category immediately, Iowa and Ohio. These areas, while by definition they're like Indiana and Kentucky, very blue, states are going to have very big blue spots in them. Overall, they have not shifted as much as the other states, partially due to a lack of development from like outside industry. So for example, one of the reasons Georgia is contentious is due to all of the films going to Georgia, meaning they need to be a little bit more open with their laws and also be willing to let in a lot of outside, so people coming from like California and New York in this television business and all that jazz. While Iowa and Ohio are doing the exact opposite. They are losing people of higher education backgrounds, and also they aren't growing. In fact, they're shrinking. They're becoming more their suburbs aren't becoming more urban, is a good way to put it. They're just building more suburb. So they haven't had that switch. They're still fiscally conservative over socially liberal because, frankly, they're seeing a lot more economic hardship than they are necessarily social hardship. Which is both are good pickups for the Republicans. It doesn't make up for the loss of, let's say, Texas, but if you were in their position, you'd much rather lose Indiana and Kentucky over Ohio and Iowa. Nebraska's 2nd District and Maine's 2nd District are going to roughly remain the same. However, I will say Maine's 2nd District will be another Republican pickup. I think the urban-rural divide will hit that area strong enough. It will be a red mainstay in the Northeast for a very long time. What about the Democrats? Are they going to have any pickups? Well, they're going to have two. They are North Carolina and Georgia. And if you notice, this is very good news for the Democrats because they're now over 270. That's an almost guaranteed victory in the Electoral College. And that comes from, frankly, one very simple thing. These areas are getting really, really blue and not losing many people. Speaking of changing color but not losing many people, Florida will, however, remain red. It is one of the few states where the Latino minority has become very Republican in nature. They'll turn out for Democrats, but for the most part, they vote almost analogously with whites. This is what Republicans were going for in the pre-Trump era, because it would have helped them keep this area in the battleground section, keep Texas, and also Florida, a much more equitable battlefield for the Republicans. So most likely by the end of the decade, we'll treat Florida as we currently treat Texas, a very red state that maybe one day the Democrats could flip. But Democrats gain in Georgia and North Carolina, because I said you got all this outside development, all of these highly educated workers, the urbanization of the suburbs, and frankly, a large African-American minority that's finally getting reenfranchised. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, in my opinion, are actually going to remain toss-ups because they're small enough states that Wisconsin is a small enough state, its blue area is going to keep it contentious for the Democrats, but overall I think we'll start seeing it default more to red, so where Indiana and Kentucky are headed. Well, Pennsylvania will default blue more often, but if those urban areas don't turn out because of its geography, you don't have many suburbs, you've got a lot of rural areas and a lot of urban areas and nothing in between. So when it comes to like the idea of urban versus rural in the classic sense, no real suburban areas. And as such, you're going to see Pennsylvania be very default blue, but still very in contention. And the last state I want to talk about is, of course, Alaska. Alaska is going to be interesting because I think it's already here, because it adopted ranked choice voting. Alaska has famously had about 4 major parties that end up on the ballot: the Libertarian, the Alaska Independent, or just Independence Party, the Democrats, and the Republicans. Typically, the Republicans can get a minority of the vote, a plurality of the vote, a plurality of the vote, which means they get like 40%, while the other 3 groups can get more. The other 3 groups will typically team up behind someone, such as they did for the Senate election, this past Senate race with Al Gross, which the more we look at the data, the more it's seeming like he lost because he was labeled as a Democrat on the ballot, as opposed to an independent, which is what he was running as. But essentially, you've got 4 main parties, and the other 3 will sometimes team up to try and unseat the GOP candidate. However, now, with their new top 4 ranked choice voting, all 4 can put a guy on the ballot. Meaning, you end up with a case where people can rank choice vote, and that's not going to do good things for the Republican. And I think what we're going to see is an Alaska independent candidate who will end up, I would say, even more politically isolated from the 2-party system than Lisa Murkowski, who will, for the most part, probably not caucus with either party, and instead just be pro or against stuff for helping Alaska. So this is what I think we'll end up with, a new map where Republicans actually lose electoral votes in the long term, while Democrats end up with a pretty entrenched position. So with all that being said, if you like the video, drop a like and a comment down below. If you want to see more from the channel, click the subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted when new content is released. If you want to hear more from me outside of YouTube, I have a Twitter at OneManThinkTan1, the Roman numeral, link in the description below. And as always, and most importantly, have a wonderful day.